Hi, everybody. So here I am. It is Sunday. It is 6 o'clock by my reckoning, but I know that it is, what's the word I'm looking for? Daylight savings time. So for some of you, this might be late or confusing or something, and I'm sorry. I didn't realize when I picked the day that it was also daylight savings. I am sitting in my empty office building. It's a little strange. I think I am the only person in the whole building, but so I'm talking into the void. So I'm hoping someone is there on the other end. Hi. um, so today I had high hopes to go to a NaNoWriMo write-in. I'm not a NaNoWriMo participant. I've never been able to do it for various reasons, having to do with November being the worst month ever. So, but I thought I could go to a write-in and kind of say hi to people and see what it was like, and so super excited. So I had this quest to go to this write-in, and it was at the Doe Library in Berkeley, and it just turned into the saga of driving in traffic for hours and not being able to find a parking spot. And so eventually I just turned around and left and came back to the office. So Ty says that she's there, Ty says that there's a list of things. Oh, okay. All right, Ty. But I thought you said they were mostly spoilers. Yay, everybody's here. Yeah, the whole NaNoWriMo thing was a bust. So I'm not surprised because frankly, every time I've tried to do Nano, it's always been a bit of a bust. So maybe next year. Next year will be the charm, I hope. So anyway, we're going to do a Q&A. I'm hoping you guys have some questions, but I did get a few ahead of time from people, so I can start us off with a few things. Look at my extremely pretty notebook. I'm very proud of it. Oh, good. So we have some non-spoilery ones. Non-spoilerly questions. So the idea is, my policy on spoilers is anything's fair game if the book has been out for at least a year, which means that Romancing the Inventor is not fair game, but neither is Poison or Protect, frankly, right? Because that was half a year ago. But, what was I saying? Sorry, you guys, it's been a long weekend. Yeah, so, but anything prior to a year is totally fair game. So no Imprudence, no Poison or Protect, and no Romancing the Inventor, but everything else is fine. And, yeah, you should be caught up by now if you're bothering to watch me do a Q&A for an hour. But then after this, I'm going to bop over to the Spoiler Squee group real quickly and do another quick live, maybe just like 15, 20 minutes or so, for actual spoilers. If anybody really wants to talk about the plans that I have and the spoilers that are afoot, you can follow me over there after this. But I wanted to make sure it was in that protected environment because I know people really don't want spoilers and I wouldn't want to do that to anybody. So let me see, what were my questions? So, I'm sorry I didn't write down who wrote the question, but I'll just say the question. So somebody wanted to know if I had plans for books set prior to the Finishing School series. So for the first time, no one's ever asked me this before, but on the other Q&A, I also got this question. People asked me if I would ever write about Connell before Alexia, so like when he was married, because when he was a human, he was married and had kids, obviously, because there's Sidheg, who's the great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter. And I'd never actually even thought about that. I think it would be really hard to write because I feel like you guys as readers would be kind of frustrated seeing him with somebody else because they're so perfect for each other. But I can't imagine doing that. I do. So the first part of the question, which is just writing things that are set earlier in time, say in the Regency era, yeah, I'd love to write more Alessandro stuff, but I had always thought of writing Alessandro rather than Connell. I never really thought about Connell. And I could see writing some other of the werewolves, maybe backstory, or even sort of some Lord Akaldama backstory. He would have had a grand time in the Regency or in the Georgian era. So Lyle, for example, I could see some of his past coming back to haunt him. But I'd never thought about Connell. And now that you've given me the idea, I'll keep it in the back of my head, because that's one of the reasons I do Q&As like this, you guys, obviously, is you give me great ideas. So I gotta file them away. People will often ask me if I'll ever be done writing in this world, and I'm like, I just have endless story ideas, so I doubt it. Yeah, Lord Uncle Nama backstory would be really fun to write. But probably only as shorts, you guys. I can't imagine spending too much more time in his head, even if I'm writing from like a drone's perspective. Just being around him is kind of exhausting for me, so I can't imagine writing much more than just a short story. But Jesse would like to know more about Channing. We did talk about this briefly in the other Q&A that I did on the launch day on Tuesday, and I am planning to write a Channing novella with giving him a nice lady, or a not so nice lady, because she has to be tough enough for him. And I'm hoping to write that next year. It's on the long list, but it's definitely slated, so that's my intent. I don't even have an outline or anything for it yet, so I'm not going to make any promises, but Channing is definitely, I definitely have my eagle eye on Channing. You can see, at least I hope some of you can see, that I switched it up a little bit with Channing. I wanted you guys to see Imogen, see him as a more sympathetic character, because obviously he and Alexia don't like each other whatsoever, but Imogen and he kind of had a little moment of understanding, and that was an opportunity for me to showcase that he was a more well-rounded character than you thought he was. So, because I always knew he has a decent streak in him. It's just going to take some time getting it out. Ty wants to know if I've ever written something not from outline form. Yeah, so the recent piece that I've written that's going to come out next year, mid-year in July, which is the gay urban fantasy paranormal romance that's set in modern day in the Bay Area. That one was almost entirely without an outline, and it was just because it woke me up in the middle of the night and I just started writing it, and then I was having so much fun, and because there was just no pressure whatsoever, because it wasn't even in the same universe, and I didn't even think I would ever publish it or anything, I just let myself do whatever I wanted. Now, of course, I've decided I am going to publish it, so I need to go back and rework it. But I have a pretty solid kind of mental pacing outline for romance now. At least the pulse points of romance. If it's going to be a straight up romance first, rather than kind of a more adventure plot or more steampunky plot. So, and so that, like, I can hit those points. I can hit a relationship journey and make it exciting, I hope. Pretty instinctually now. So there's an outline, but it's kind of like in the back of my head. So yes, but it isn't common. Although I will say every book is different. So some, like Poison or Protect, had a very skinny outline. It was almost just like ideas, like a single sentence for each chapter. And some books have way more complicated outlines. I have a feeling that the next Custard Protocol book is going to be a pretty complicated one. Jessica wants to know, hi, sweetheart. What's the thing that I enjoyed most about writing Romancing the Inventor? And what's the thing I hope most people will enjoy about reading it? The thing I most enjoyed about Romancing the Inventor, I think, is Imogen's voice and personality, and the fact that with her I got to write a working class character, which I've never really gotten to explore before. I mean, there have been working class characters in my books, but they've never been the point of view character that I'm writing from before. And so that was super exciting for me, and also exciting for me to write a character who kind of knew who she was, but and what she wanted, but was thwarted by her own station in life more than anything else, and her own position as a woman. It's more honest, I guess, to the historical time period, which I kind of got to avoid dealing with this kind of thing with my aristocratic characters, because the supernatural imposes a certain level of autonomy, or preternatural, and money, of course, gives you a lot more leeway in getting away with things in a socially strictured society, which Imogen doesn't have those advantages. So writing a character that's disadvantaged like that was pretty fun. And what's the thing I hope you guys enjoy seeing female romance, like a romantic comedy, I guess is what I wrote. And the more I read in the romance genre, the more I am hungry for diverse romantic main relationships because they're relatively rare. And female female seems particularly rare to me. I mean, there seems to be certain niches for lesbian romances, like suspense is pretty popular, and even kind of mystery and noir with a romance element. But just a sort of straight up historical romantic comedy seems a little rarer. So I kind of want to. It's me, so I'm always trying to write something that I think fills a gap of what I want to read that no one else has written. So that's one of the things I did with this book that I hope everyone enjoys reading about. Am I ever gonna? Isaac wants to know if I will write more marine biology. Yeah, the book that is coming out in July is the follow up to marine biology. So it's the thought experiment about what happens when Alec, who's the main character in marine biology, who's the alpha werewolf, but who's like a nerdy, gay marine biologist who just happens to be an alpha. He meets and falls in love. Sorry, guys, spoilers, I warned you. He meets and falls in love with the merman in that book. And this is the story about what happens when he takes his merman boyfriend and his pack, his new, like, young East Coast pack, and they move to San Francisco because they want to be in a place that's more accepting. But San Francisco and all of the supernatural creatures in the Bay Area have these preconceived notions about werewolves because they have the reputation for being sort of rednecks and stuff. So they have to sort of fight. And it's Alec is in the book. But it's not his story. It's his brother's. His brother is the main character. So yeah. So marine biology, yes. Hopefully July. Ty wants to know if it's you could ask, but I can just say, Ty, that it's too spoilery. That will be my answer, and you can save it, and we'll do it later. So ask away, and then if it doesn't work, we'll wait till later. Lisa wants to know if we get to hear about how Quinnell feels about Imogen someday. I mean, I think so. He's away at university. He's young, but he's gone to uni early, which happened in the Victorian era. If you were smart, you went off when you were like 16 to university. He wants to know, so he will have known about her, and she'd kind of been a sort of stepmom in a strange way. She doesn't come up in, well, frankly, because she didn't exist in my head yet in either of the Custard Protocol books, although Genevieve is mentioned as still being a drone. And so RTI like ties into that. So, but yeah, I mean, if I need to, they will meet, but, so there are so many characters already in the Custard Protocol book that revisiting the adult characters has to be done pretty judiciously, and I can't introduce too many of them at once. So even though you guys know them, new readers to the Custard Protocol series might not. So I don't want too many names from the past rolling around. It gets a little too self-referential, and it can come up as kind of like pedantic, and I don't want to edge into epic territory where there's just so many bazillion characters people have to start keeping lists and lists and lists. So she might not, I don't know, if I need her, if I need her, she'll reappear. But I gave them, at the end of Romancing the Inventor, I gave them, I mean, this is not a spoiler because it is a romance novella, so you guys know there's a happy ending, I should hope. But I gave them an ending that I felt like they would both love, like a future that they would adore. And so the sort of activities of Rue and her crazy crew are going to be pretty non-impactful on those, which is fine. They need some peace and quiet. Who doesn't? Who's my favorite minor character from the Parasol universe? Well, I really love Lord Akeldama. I've said it before, and I'll say it again because he's just so easy to write. So when he has a scene, it's just easy for me to write. I really love kind of silent, what I would call the silent but deadly characters. So those are characters that people love, I love, readers really relate to, but they actually have very little screen time, and they say very little or nothing at all. So Flute is a great example of that kind of a character. Virgil is another good one from the Custard Protocol books. They tend to be quietly capable because I very much admire that kind of personality, so I tend to have characters. Bumbersnoot is another one of those characters. They have so much personality, but it's a test for me as a writer because I rely on dialogue. I love dialogue, and so characters that have little dialogue become a challenge because I must use description to get their personalities across. And description, when you're writing with a single point of view character, is always colored by your character's point of view, unless I introduce the narrator as a third voice, which I did do in Solus and a couple of the other books, but mostly I don't. So it's always challenging as a writer to get across how I feel about a character through the lens of the point of view character that I'm writing from. And those characters like Bumbersnoot and Virgil and Flute, they are, they're fun and challenging because of that. So I tend to really like those. What is the most challenging thing I've found writing about hive life from day to day? Well, it was interesting, an interesting thought experiments for me writing Romancing the Inventor to think about what the hive was like during the daytime when none of the vampires are around being annoying and willful and demanding and snacking all the time. So that was kind of part of it. And also building a aristocratic household that kind of functioned the way an actual Victorian household and staff would have functioned, but also imposing this external model of what a hive is like in my head on top of that. So that was kind of, it was really enjoyable actually. To a strange extent, I really wish I'd had more time to to kind of be in the hive in the novella. But one of the reasons for me to do these novellas is to keep them really quite tight. So don't have time to waffle about and talking about hive life, etc. Am I excited by my trip to Singapore? I am. I am also one of those people who kind of doesn't get excited about a trip until I'm actually there. And I don't know why that is. My partner's super like into reading up on the place we're going to be visiting and drawing, like getting maps and drawing, like coming up with ideas of things we're going to do. And I'm kind of more just relaxed, and I don't know if it comes from my archaeology days. You sort of end up there and then see what happens and decide what's exciting and what food you want to eat when you're on the ground, as far as I'm concerned. And the other side effect about this is that I don't really have a chance to get either excited or nervous about the trip because I had this launch that just kind of took over my world and my life, so I didn't really have a chance to think about anything else. And maybe that's not a bad thing. I'm not a nervous flyer or anything, so I'm not perturbed about the flight. It's 17 hours and 45 minutes or something. It's like one of the longest flights you can take that's nonstop. But dude, I can sit and entertain myself for 18 hours with no problem whatsoever. That's an advantage of being a writer. Jess says she loved seeing the outsider view of Alexia and her mannerisms. I must say that part of Romancing the Inventor I really, really enjoyed writing. I think it's one of my favorite things and one of the reasons I write these sort of shared books in the same universe where you can have a main character turn up as a side character, and it's so fun. Just so fun to write. It was so fun to write Prudence's opinion on her mother, because can you imagine having Alexia for a mother? Oh my god. And it was so fun to write Imogen as a complete outsider, observing not just Alexia, but Alexia and Genevieve interacting with each other. Because again, totally different perspective. And yeah, oh god, it was so much fun to write. Ty wants to know how Channing and Imogen's relations came about. So I don't know if I've really talked about this, but one of the things that, like, I don't consider myself a writer who really gets writer's block or anything, but I do have these kind of crystal clear moments of kind of inspiration or epiphany or something, and that's the juncture I know I can write the story. And those crystal clear moments are usually a very vivid scene that I can see in my head. So with Soulless, it was the scene where Ivy and Alexia are walking together in Hyde Park, and Ivy is shocked by Alexia's blasé attitude to having had to kill a vampire the night before. Now, that's not the first scene in the book, but that's the scene I saw in my head. And with Imogen and Romancing the Inventor, the first scene that I saw in my head was that confrontation with, or non-confrontation, God, I can't speak tonight, with Channing outside that tavern. And I could see, you know, sorry guys, I'm literally downstairs sitting on top of my wireless router so that the connection is better, but the device is telling me the connection isn't great. Anyway, so that scene with Channing was the first one. And at first it was just kind of Imogen and then this werewolf approaching her and understanding her in a way because immortals have so much more life experience. I think they're more intuitive to what mortals are going through in a very odd way. They'll admit things more readily than a mortal will because they've seen it all before. And then in that moment, I also realized it was Channing who was observing her. So in a strange way, that little scene was the sort of beginning scene that told me that I could write the whole book. And that gave me kind of all these aspects of Imogen's character and personality. Sorry, I'm scrolling back through. I'm not sure I'll get to everybody's questions, but I will try. Why did I use a single point of view? So just Imogen for Romancing the Inventor, whereas I had two. I had Gavin and Prussia in Poison or Protect. So I tried it with Genevieve. When I first wrote it, I was doing a swapped POV back and forth, and frankly, it just wasn't working for me. There's no other way to put it, and there's no scientific way to put it. I'm sorry. Occasionally, my creative brain just takes over, and the creative brain basically said, this is Imogen's story to tell from the get-go, and just wouldn't allow Genevieve to have her say. And there's no more complicated answer, I'm afraid. Do I anticipate the appearance of Professor Braithwaite? I thought about him recently, actually. I can't remember under what circumstances. I think I was looking at some pictures of Dartmoor. But no, I don't. I think he turns into this kind of boogeyman of the moors for that part of Dartmoor. Story about Alexia called The Hedgehog Incident. Alias Meet Cute. Because I'm so witty. Yeah, I would like to write Alexia and Connell's meeting story. I haven't quite figured it out in my head yet. I mean, I know he sat on a hedgehog, that's part of it, but how did that come about? We must keep the hedgehog from getting injured. Was it an actual live hedgehog, or was it the statue of a hedgehog? These are questions that I must ruminate upon. I actually have an arrangement to go visit some hedgehogs early next year, because I want to have an interaction with a hedgehog to find out. I mean, I've seen videos, obviously, but yeah, so perhaps it will happen. Climbing back into Alexia's brain would be a challenge, so yeah, that's a lot of work. More work than you think. It would only be a short story, though. Given the opportunity, what would I choose to conceal in a crocheted octopus? Well, tea, obviously. It's at any given point in time, there is usually a tea bag stashed somewhere on my person, which actually turns out to be a difficult thing for Singapore because I just put the bag. I don't have like labeled bags or anything, and I had to go through all of my various kits and things that I use for traveling and take out all the unlabeled bags of mysterious leafy stuff, because apparently that can get you into trouble in Singapore. So far as novellas for side characters, Katrina would like to propose that I do one around Lord Uncle Thomas' cat. That's a hilarious idea. Oh my god, that's descending into a level of sublime comedy. The calico one that murders the tasseled pillows. Ah, man. This is another one that I never even thought about. I don't know. I could probably write the mind of a cat, but I'm already facing that challenge with Teshret in the world, so. Ty wants to learn if we're going to ever learn about Lady Lynette's background. So she's one of those characters. A lot of the teachers are those characters that I actually thought about for Delightfully Deadly novellas. So I want to do the main side characters first, and if those novellas are still like selling well and doing well, and I still want to write them, then I could certainly see doing some of the teachers as in novella form, giving them some of their own stories for the Delightfully Deadly. And also I'd really like to write Dimity's parents' romance, because, you know, they're a star-crossed lover, a Bunsen boy and a Geraldine's girl, so I think that would be really fun to write. It's not going to be enough. If I write a story that stars a POV cat, you guys, it would be a short story. It'd never be a novella. Can you imagine 40,000 words in a cat's brain? Craigie. Talk about Spoo. I love Spoo. I love Spoo and Virgil. They're two of my favorite characters in the Kester Protocol books. It would be fun to write about them sort of later on, given that they're having this crazy childhood growing up. Spoo is many things. A reminder to Rue and her friends and Percy and Primrose that they're adults now and that they probably should take some responsibility for their actions. But also a reminder to the readers that there's this underbelly of the Victorian world, which I treat very, very lightly, but involves child labor in a big way. So, you know, and I also have another side to that, which is I believe in giving kids responsibility. So in a strange way, like, of course I'm against child labor, but I also think like kids ought to not be too coddled, and they should have responsibility and jobs. And I started working when I was 7 years old, and then I was like the town babysitter for years. So I believe that kids should work. So that's kind of Spoo. A bit of both. Do I ever have a difficult time explaining the science side of the Parasolvers? You know what? I've never really tried to like up and explain it fully. On the blog, I've hosted a couple of like guest authors who come in and like do long diatribes on sort of how the science might have worked. I do know exactly how the science works in terms of etheric interaction with human skin and blood, in terms of excess soul and immortality and metanatural and preternatural. So I have it all kind of pseudoscience. I mean, obviously doesn't really work, but it does in my universe. I have it all like charted out, but because a lot of that stuff is still kind of yet to be revealed, or it changes slightly, I've never scanned it and put it up on the net. If I ever end up completing it, like feeling like I've told everything in terms of because I reveal parts of my world as kind of plot points sometimes. So I intentionally try never to do a lot of info dumping where I'm just describing how the world works. I'd rather you and I figured out how the world works together with our characters, which is why Prudence is completely unique, and why Alexia knew so little about herself, because I wanted us to discover it together rather than me just telling you about it, because that's boring. But I do know it all. I had to figure it all out if we were going to discover it. I just haven't written it all out in all of the books yet. But at some point, once I feel like what I know has been adequately sort of distributed via the story, then I'll probably put the actual data up in the wiki or something so you can all see. Katie says, all her head comments belong to us. What's the hardest situation to write in Romancing the Inventor? Well, the Nookie scenes, I've talked about this. I always find them the most difficult. It was actually, they're not very graphic in Romancing the Inventor, and they were actually easier than I expected. I think because Imogen's so comfortable with herself, and there was this underpinning of humor between the two of them. So, yeah, I don't know what was the hardest. I didn't really struggle with that book. I don't feel like I had too much. It just seemed to work. This is the pleasure of the novellas, is they seem to come really easily to me. Yeah, nookie is my favorite word too, because it's a very delicate way of saying what we all know I'm saying. I'm afraid I'm probably missing things. What was the hardest scene? We got that one. All the headcanons. Will Lorde fall in love again in a future story? I guess the real question, you guys, is whether Lord A ever falls in love at all. At least as we think of it. I think he's so old at this juncture that he just has a different concept of love. I've always been incredibly taken with the Greek idea that there are multiple forms of different kinds of love, romantic love as well as platonic love. So we tend to think of it as just these two, which is kind of strangely limiting, whereas the ancient Greeks had all of these different ideas about the different forms that love could take. And I love that. I adore the idea. And I think Lord Akaldama doesn't love in the way that most humans experience romantic love, because he couldn't let himself, because they're all mayflies, all of his drones who he adores, but most of them will die before he does, and he knows that. So that has to be a very different way to go into any kind of a relationship. So I got very philosophical. The preternatural from the north. Ty wants to know, is he ever going to come into the fray? Well, I have been thinking about him. He's in the back of my head. But without spoilers, I can't really talk about what he's up against. So that might be something for the squee discussion later. Are we going to meet more soulless? Yes, there are more soulless. Yeah, that's a spoiler question. Sabrina needs to be caught up on my books. We'll just say that. Alexia currently stands as the only female soulless. But there might be more, but most of the rest are men. We get a short story or novella about the marine biology boys. I just answered this earlier in the talk, Colton, but the book, and it is a book, the novel, that I'm releasing in July, hopefully, if everything goes smoothly. I'm gunning for, I think, July 17th, which is the Tuesday before Comic-Con, is the follow-up novel to marine biology. So you will see those boys again, and that's where you'll see them. Yes, nobody likes Henry. You're not meant to like Henry. Sorry, there are all these non sequiturs. What has been the most difficult aspect of being a self-published writer? Everything's a learning curve, I suppose. So I switched. I have done a lot of self-publishing recently because I had a gap in contract, so I had the time. And I've been wanting to try it for much longer, actually. I just never had any time to spare on it, and I purposely took some time off to do it because of the control. So I'm a total control freak. And a lot of things happened during the course of, 7-8 years in traditional publishing that brought home to me the fact of how little control I have. Not just over the end product with things like typos or whatever, but also things like the Barnes & Noble debacle, which some of you went through with me, for which I apologize, but that was rough. And so I finally just said, okay, I'm going to try doing this on my own. Novellas seem to be the easiest way to do it because I know I can write them faster and get them out, move them faster. And I also really love that length, and there isn't a traditional venue for it, really. There's a couple, but none that I would really like to publish with, or who would frankly be very interested in my style of stuff. So one of the things that was hard to learn was that control, which I was so yearning for, it's still not totally there. Like I'm never gonna have that much control, as much control as I want. I think that was the biggest learning process for me. Like I'm still gonna be dealing with draft to digital, pushing something out to Barnes & Noble and not updating the description of the book for an additional week. And there's nothing I can do about that. And that's just the platforms relating to each other. Or the UI on Ingram Spark is so hard to deal with. And then convincing bookstores, brick and mortar bookstores, that they maybe do want to carry an independently published book. Those kinds of things are things that I, again, don't have any control over. So it's just, I'm old enough now to have learned this lesson. So I'm getting there. Trying to learn to relax and let go a little bit. It's hard when you're a perfectionist, you guys. The affectionate relationship between Lord Akldama and Biffy. Yeah, that was really fun to write. But if you go back and reread those books, you'll see that they don't get a lot of screen time, those two. A lot of that affectionate relationship is I don't know, 10 sentences or something in total. Um, which either speaks to you guys as my readers reading a lot into those 10 sentences, or me writing some very powerful 10 sentences. I don't know which. But yeah, I mean, I think Lord Akldama does have ones he loves more than other, and I think Biffy was probably very, very easy to love in his way. But don't worry, Biffy will be fine. We'll fix him. Will I ever go to the Far East? One of the things I like to do is take my characters to physical locations that I've actually been to or know a great deal about because I studied the sites there or something in my previous life. So I have never been to the Far East. I'm going to Singapore. And actually one of the things I'm going to do while I'm there is some on-the-ground research into what the island was like during the Victorian era. Because I would maybe like to take the Custer Protocol crew there. I'm not sure. I will see what I dig up, if there's some exciting things that happened during that time period that they could explore. But, I mean, Singapore is, it's far. It's not all the way to Japan, but, and I love the idea of that because Singapore is a melting pot and it has so many different cultures. It'd be really fun to see what kind of different supernaturals also congregated on that one island. Do Alexia, Ivy, and Genevieve ever realize they all know Sophronia? Do they? Do I remember right? Yes, you do remember right. They do all know Sophronia. The question is, how many characters can Gail write into her books that know Sophronia without realizing that everyone else knows Sophronia? And how much has Sophronia been mucking up everybody's lives in the background for the last 40 years? That's the real question. Sophronia is very, very good at her job. I'll put it that way. The Wicker Chicken. Yes, Ty is asking the same question. Does Alexia ever know? Don't know. The better question is, would Alexia ever care? So, it's Alexia. She's kind of obtuse. How far into the future would I like the Parasolverse to go? Well, the book that's coming out in July is not Parasolverse, but it could be. It could be the future that shifts. So, in a roundabout way to answer the question, I believe in the rebound effect of alternate history. So, I believe that there's a single timeline that you could go and muck about with the history of the past, but that the history would eventually rescript itself to become the present. So, not like Back to the Future. The opposite of Back to the Future. The opposite being that you could go and muck around in the past, Marty McFly could, and nothing would ever change in the present or the future. That is just one of my philosophies on time travel, possibly because I'm an archaeologist. So I think that the past is the past and it's set. So a present-day Parasolverse would look a lot like this one, in terms of all of the great wars would have occurred, the Cold War. So like a lot of major things would still have happened. The population would be similar and all those sorts of things. Supernaturals might still exist, perhaps under a different context. So in other words, the history of the supernatural in combined with the history of reality, they would have meshed to each other. So, if you had a great war, then you might also have a supernatural great war that's going on that affects their population and our populations at the same time. That sort of thing. Yeah. Everybody's talking about the great Barnes & Noble. Yeah, the Barnes & Noble fail. That was rough, you guys. That was not a good time. In fact, I was looking at that video there. I think Ty found it for me. There was a video that popped up on YouTube that it was Waistcoats and Weaponry in November of 2014. And I was on tour for that book when Barnes & Noble decided not to ship the 500 that I had signed for them. And there's a video of me doing like a Q&A, live Q&A at the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. And that was and I'm looking at this video and I'm like, well, it's your standard Gail Q&A, except my energy level is just like so low. I'm so much less animated and quieter than normal. It's really weird to see myself like that, because I'm like, that almost doesn't look like me. It looks like sort of a robotic version of me. And I'm like, why was I so, like, had I really been that, like, tired at the end of that tour? And I realized that was the day after I'd found out. So that you can kind of see the after effects of that incident, which I prefer not to think about. Doesn't Lilliput teach me about letting go and having no control because she's in charge? You guys, my cat is trained. I'm that bad. She uses the human toilet, and she has a set of commands. She can sit and fetch. She can jump on command. She comes when she's called. Like, she's like a little puppy dog because I'm that kind of human being. Need more Sophronia. Need more Sophronia. She got 4 books, you guys. That's a lot of wordage for one of my characters. Ty hopes that Ivy sticks around long enough to see Neon. I think Ivy may be single-handedly responsible for the 1980s fashion. Who else would you blame? She's certainly responsible for the, like, crazy frickin' hats at the turn of the century. If I could be a were-creature, what would I be? Probably a shapeshifter, despite the pain. Although I do love fashion, so the vampires have a certain appeal, and they live longer in my past. But I really like the idea of shapeshifting. I've always loved the idea of shapeshifting. I think that would be so much fun. And I would opt for a mermaid if I had a choice, or Selkie or something. I've always wanted gills and to be able to breathe underwater. Other people, when they ask for superpowers, always want to fly, and I always wanted my own set of gills. Because if I could just spend more time underwater, I'd be that much happier. I love swimming. So, Isaac, I think that also answers your question. Probably werewolf if I have to pick between the 2 mainstays, but I'd love to be a werecat, and that'd be really fun, too. Do I enjoy writing Genevieve LeFou more as her younger self, her 30s or her 40s? That's an excellent question. I think I'm going to cop out and say I really loved writing her all different ways. Part of that's the POV switch as well. I adore when I get to write a character that's seen through different other characters' point of views. So some of my favorite characters will reoccur simply as an opportunity for me to explore them with a different character's eyes. So I think Vive, I think I really like her, if I have to pick, I'd say as her youngest self, because it was bittersweet. And, you know, I do like torturing my readers a little bit. I am that much of an author. I mean, I'm never going to go all George R.R. Martin and start killing everybody on you just to see you suffer. But I do like seeing you suffer a little bit. So it's kind of like, it has that, like picking at a scar or something feel when I wrote Vive as this innocent 10-year-old girl who hasn't had her heart broken yet. And so that, I hope, gave my readers who'd already met her in the Parasol Protectorate the opportunity to see her as less of this kind of flirtatious, enigmatic, brilliant genius, and more as this sort of slightly heartbroken, bitter woman who becomes what happens in Heartless. So, in other words, by seeing the reflection of Vive as this young, innocent, delightful, precocious girl, you can also see what changed in her and what might have driven her to build the Octamadon and destroy half of London, because her child is stolen from her. Primrose training Tashret. Yeah. Poor Tasha, she's got no idea what she's in for if she keeps up with her pursuit. Jesse wants more soap. I love soap. Soap I would like to bring back, and you can probably guess, I think Ty probably has already guessed what role soap will fall into. I don't know that he'll get a lot of face time. It's probably going to be referential, but for those of you who are perked up, you'll spot it. And then if I ever write that Sid Haig book, which is years in the future, you guys, but it's there. If I ever do write that book, he'll reappear in that book as well. Will we see Viva Bunson's? Probably not. It's one of those things where I don't necessarily feel the need to revisit her at that age bracket. I think she teared it up, had a grand old time. Probably drove everybody crazy at the School for Evil Geniuses. Amanda's now picturing Ivy with bright fuchsia eyeshadow and crimped hair and spandex leggings. Sadly, Amanda, you have just described me in the 1980s. I actually used to color my crimped hair with a pink highlighter pen. Oh yes, not pretty, you guys. Not pretty. What character is the hardest for me to write? Generally, any character that I don't have a good handle on is difficult until I have a handle on them. Yeah. So Genevieve actually, when she first appeared, was pretty hard for me to write. And I've talked about it before, because when she first appears in Changeless, I really wanted people to like her, but I also wanted her motives to be constantly in question. So I wanted Alexia to not trust her, but like her, and I wanted the readers to kind of come along on that journey. So that was pretty hard to write. She was probably the most challenging character that I ever wrote up until that juncture. But mostly if a character is fighting with me, I know my characters so well that if a character is fighting with me, it's usually because I don't know them well enough, or I've put them in a situation they wouldn't get into, or I'm trying to make them do something that they just wouldn't intrinsically do. And I know that makes me sound schizophrenic, but I actually do think about my characters that way. Will Felicity ever get her just desserts? So I thought for a while about taking the Custard Protocol crew to the U.S., to Boston or something. Felicity ends up in Boston, dominating Boston high society and causing problems for everybody. At least that's how I imagined her. I don't know if that's really where she ended up. I do have her in mind to bring back in maybe to the Custard Protocol books, but so far it hasn't happened. And I'm leery of going back to the United States for various reasons at this juncture, so I'm not sure it will happen. I'm more likely now to bring a U.S. character into England in a la Buccaneers, Edith Walton style. So, I don't know. Will Felicity? I think Biffy booting her out of society pretty much ruined her life. So for her, it was the worst thing that could possibly happen. I'm not going to answer that question. There's a couple questions in here that are too spoilery, so I'm not going to answer, or I just don't know. Haven't decided yet. Will we see more of Sid Haig after we ask it? Sabrina is asking a question that we talked a little bit about in the last Q&A, but I have an idea to write Sid Haig's story as one of the Delightfully Deadly novellas, but it'll be in the future. It'll be a ways away because it's going to be very, very complicated to write, and because Sid Haig is one of the saddest stories in my universe. I mean, people feel sorry for like Biffy and Lyle, but I always feel the most sorry for Sid Haig. So it would be difficult emotionally, strangely enough, for me to write her journey. Maybe I identify with her a little too closely. So I'm not ready yet, and I don't think the universe is ready. Speaking of the Octomaton, there's a line that says it was the second one Genevieve built. What was the first? Initially, I had actually planned to put the first Octomaton in the, or Automaton, however you want to say it, in the Romancing the Inventor. But it didn't work out because Romancing the Inventor became this kind of cozy, gothic, single location story. So I actually wrote it into her timeline, so it may or may not be on the wiki. I'm going to not have put that part on the wiki, but it is, she did do it, and it was Paris. So it was during her, or just after her, her education, over in Paris. Joe wants to know what Romancing the Inventor is about. Romancing the Inventor is about a working class girl in the original sense of working class, who takes work at a vampire hive in order to be perverted because she thinks that she might be gay, and she thinks that the vampires could help her figure that out, and then falls in love with the inventor that the vampires are kind of keeping as a pet. And then we go from there. Amanda wants to know, what kind of situations have I had characters in that they wouldn't get into? And did you force it or change the situation? This sounds like a NaNoWriMo sort of question. So because I tend to outline very strictly, most of the time my characters don't get into situations where I can't extract them out because I have a plan, usually, for whatever they get into. So if the character has gotten into a situation that the character can't handle, then I've messed up as an author. I'm going to have to go back and fix it. Or I put the wrong character into that situation. I have to go back and arrange it so someone else gets into it. And I actually have done that, where I've put Rue into a situation, for example, and I was like, no, Primrose is the one who can handle this. And I had to go back and fix that. Yeah, and you can think of that, for those of you who have the Harry Potter books, as the Neville with the sword situation. So there's a reason that J.K. Rowling, like, thematically, but also, like, just as a writer, why she has Neville kill the snake with the sword, rather than Harry. And you need to use your side characters sometimes need to do the most heroic things. And I'm a particular fan of that kind of thing. Why didn't Imogen run into Lord A? I don't know. She just didn't. She probably should have, because I like to joke that I put Lord Aquildama into all of my books, but didn't happen in the story. How drastically did Genevieve redesign or drastically? I wouldn't put past a 3-wall remodel on her. Poor Lyle. He did love that Jed. Who gave Sophronia the codename Wicker Chicker? She chooses it herself. I'm pretty sure. I don't remember. Someone who's more familiar with the Finishing School books at this juncture can handle that question, but I think Sophronia chooses it. Yeah, Jessie says it's hard to read Sitheg in the Finishing School books knowing what her future is. Yeah, it is hard, and I didn't really intend it to be that rough, which is one of the reasons I want to revisit her. I don't like how sad her ending is, although she does get ultimately what she wants, which is her pack. And she is a good alpha, so it is the right choice. But is she happy? That is a good question, and I would like to go check in on her. Will the new Custard Protocol book still be from Rue's perspective? I don't think so. I haven't started writing them yet, so I haven't had the crystal clarity of the scene yet, as I talked about earlier. But my intent at this point in time is to write the next one from Primrose's perspective. And it's a decision as to whether it's just going to be Primrose or if it's going to be a POV swap between Primrose and a different character. Maybe Primrose and Rue? I don't know. Haven't decided yet. Yeah, I need to think about that. That's one of the things I have slated perhaps to think about on an 18-hour flight to Singapore. We'll see. Do I read my humorous passages to others to make sure they are in fact humorous? On occasion, not often. So I'm part of a writer's group, and I do a writing retreat once a year. And one of the stipulations on that retreat is that we have to read out loud something that we wrote that day. There's no critique. It's just to prove that you actually wrote something. And when I'm on retreat, I'm very prolific, so I have way more than 10 minutes worth of stuff to read at the end of any given day. So I'll often choose a funny passage to read out loud to see if people are laughing and if the pulse beats are coming across. I also have alpha readers who read specifically for humor. So I used to, they're now pretty busy, but I used to have 3 women, old friends of mine, and they each have a different sense of humor, and they'll read my books, and I will look to make sure that there are little notations about laughter or amusement in all different colored pens. I give them each a different pen color, to make sure I'm hitting like different kinds of humor as often as possible. I don't get to do that as much as I used to because they have busy lives and they can't always bow to my very time constrained schedule. But I still try and get beta readers or alpha readers to check. The humor is particularly important to me. Any plan to have any more stories set in France? Possibly. So I was just reading over the outline for Custard Protocol 3, and I had initially had them going to France in search of a hat. I don't know if that's still going to happen, actually, now that that outline was kind of notated and written before I had finished the end of Imprudence, and those of you who've read all the way to the very end of Imprudence, you know that there's a new, rather startling character introduced at the end who changes everything. So I might not be able to take them to France. So, again, when some authors say they're character-driven, my stuff is so character-driven that literally I introduce a new character and the whole plot for another book might have to change. Why didn't the vampires demolish Woolsey and build a new house? Because she got tethered to it. And I'm never quite sure if, like, the tether is to the actual, like, ground underneath a building or kind of weirdly into, like, the brick and mortar of the building of itself. But when the new queen occupied it, she occupied that house. So they couldn't, like, tear it down and rebuild it around her. They could maybe put up a facade all the way on the outside, and I wouldn't put it past them to do that kind of thing. But, yeah, I don't know that they care what it looks like on the outside that much. The queen, after all, is only seeing the inside, so she just keeps changing the curtains with every season. Amber wants to know Primrose and Percy, and I think you're asking if the POV swap would be between the two of them, and the answer is it won't be Percy. It would be Primrose and somebody else. Right now, my intent is to have Percy be the fourth book, or more properly, a new character come in who is meant for Percy to be the fourth book. Will the future Custard Protocol books be self-published as well, or will I continue traditional? Well, right now the intent is to continue traditional. It's really, really challenging to switch publishers midstream and or take up the gauntlet and self-publish midstream unless there's an incredibly good reason. And I do like my publisher. I have a very good relationship with my publisher. So and you get, honestly, you get better distribution and you get into all bookstores and that kind of thing if you have a traditional publishing contract. So it would be better for you guys if the novels were traditionally published. So that's the intent. Fingers crossed. Kitty's saying that a writer's group is, I agree from an authorial standpoint, a critique group or a writer's group is not something that I'm actually a big fan of. I think it really depends. For some people are incredibly healthy. If you get the right group, it's good, but sometimes other authors want to change your intrinsic voice too much, or if you're not strong enough or confident in yourself, you get railroaded really easily. I do think it's a good idea to practice reading your stuff out loud, even if it's only into an empty room. And I do think it's a good idea to get yourself used to criticism, but also, part and parcel of being an author, especially if you intend to publish and put your work out there, is learning to hold the line when you're really confident in what you've written and learning to take suggestions for the part that you need work on. And developing that sort of critical eye, but also that confidence in yourself is a skill that a lot of us authors work hard on and are constantly kind of morphing and changing and learning more about. But I think the terror that most of us face up to when we think about a critique group is both the terror of people hating your stuff, but also the terror of being told to change something when it's wrong, when the recommendation is wrong, and you know it in your gut, and you're going to have to stand there and fight for it. And that makes critique groups kind of terrifying. Do I intend to have Percy come off as ace? No. Percy's just putz. Percy's just challenging. I think he's probably straight. Just exhausted by women. I guess he's just Ivy's male offspring, poor thing. Yeah, I don't. I have contemplated writing an ace character, but I feel incredibly challenged by that. And so it's one of those things that, like writing romance or writing nookie scenes, will I face up to the challenge and like go up to bat for it, or will I avoid it like the plague? Uh, yeah. And again, like with anything, I think the character has to speak to me. So if an ace character comes into my head and wants to be written about, then I'll write them. But no, I don't think Percy is. I don't think Percy is that character. But he hasn't spoken very confidently to me yet. He's kind of in the background. I mean, I know him, but he's mostly in the background at the moment. Joe wants to know, which women writers do I admire or inspired you to become a writer? Well, Tamora Pierce is my favorite author. I've talked about that before. Favorite in terms of she was very, very, very inspiring to me because when she wrote, I was 8 when the first Alana book came out. And that was the first book I had ever read. I'd read a lot of science fiction and fantasy. My mom raised me on Tolkien, but that was, she's British, The Water Babies, son of British, The Wind in the Willows, Tom's Midnight Garden, things like that. But Tamora Pierce's Alana was the first book where a woman or a girl was the central character. And a powerful, badass girl who worked really hard to achieve her ends. And it basically blew my 8-year-old brain wide open, and made me realize all of these things about reading and writing, and yeah. So very, very formative for me. But I mean, I think I've been influenced by a lot of women writers over the years. Who inspired me to become a writer? So I never thought I would be a writer. I grew up in a community full of poets and artists, and they never ate properly and never had any money. So I thought that's a terrible, terrible career. So I never intended to be a writer. I just always liked writing. And I figured if I wrote something, I might as well see if I can get it published. And then a friend of mine got published, so I realized that real human beings were actual like fantasy authors. That was pretty exciting. But yeah, I'm still startled. And this is where I ended up after being so confident that it was such a terrible idea. Hate being a vampire queen. Like to get out and about. Yeah, being a vampire queen is pretty tough. I mean, that tether is solid. So unless you go bonkers and insane, then yeah, you are tethered to your spot. All right, guys. Well, I think we're running up on an hour, so we should probably wind this down. I'm going to scan through and see if there are any final questions I didn't get to, but don't ask any more, okay? And then if some of you want to jump over to the Squee group, we'll do a real quick, like, spoilers. But, Ty is correcting me that one can be straight and ace, which is one of the many reasons that I'm leery about writing a character like that, because I just don't want to be jumped all over by the internet. Like, it's just exhausting. And I'm not sure I'm ready to fight that battle. Might be someone else's battle to fight. What frequently used plot devices? Valerie wants to know, which is one of my favorite questions in the universe, what frequently used plot devices do I loathe? And I can tell you in a frickin' nutshell that it's the hero's journey. I hate the hero's journey. I hate it so hard. Like, I just am so exhausted by it. Yeah, the one person against the universe conquering all. The idea that, like, there's some noble, glorious masculine ideal of one person achieving against all odds without help is disgusting and has probably ruined society as we know it, if you ask me. And all men, frankly. Like, it's okay to have connections and build networks and ask for help, and that's not weak. And until the hero's journey dies, we will never get over that. All right, guys, I'm going to go. We're freezing up. I'm going to go over to the Squee. Now that I've had my little rant at the end, anybody who makes it through can see Gail get angry about the hero's journey. It's been awesome talking to you guys. We will do this again sometime. Not for a little while, though, because it's going to be Singapore and then the holidays. So, but I will talk to you again soon. Oh, and this is your reminder. I have so much stock to get rid of in my office that I'm going to be doing a lot of giveaways on the newsletter. So if you don't get the Cheer Up, you should get the Cheer Up so I can give you books. All right. Bye.